Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The ACT Party will be supporting the Finance Service Providers Pre-Implementation Adjustments Bill. And, sir, I'd like to comment on the speech earlier this evening by the Minister and also the comments back from Leanne Dalziel, because the Minister made the point that the bill was aimed at promoting confidence in the financial sector, and that is absolutely fundamental to a growing and developing economy. And in her speech in response, Leanne Dalziel made the comment that the consequences have been far-reaching. The consequences of financial failure have been absolutely far-reaching. Well, sir, that has to be the understatement of the year. The understatement of the year. Sir, there is, at last count, some $4 or $5 billion that has either been lost or is tied up in moratoriums of money invested in finance companies. Lives have been ruined. People have committed suicide. Couples, grandparents who have worked their whole lives believing that they were setting aside sufficient to live off in their retirement have been left destitute. People have been left homeless, have had to move in with children or with their parents. Huge amounts of money has been lost. And yes, it is very important that we have confidence in the financial sector, and it is very important, as the Minister said, to create clarity for regulators and the industry. But what I'd like to do is just to comment on the importance of actually enforcing that regulation, actually enforcing that law. Some 3 weeks ago, prior to Parliament resuming, I was surprised to read on the front page of the New Zealand Herald that the new head of the Serious Fraud Office was committing the resources of his office exclusively on the investigation and possible prosecution of losses in the finance industry, sir. And I say that one looks at passing a bill like this, it is important to have the law in place, but it's more important that the law actually be enforced. And yes, it's great that the Serious Fraud Office is putting the effort in. But I ask, why did it take a change of chief executive? Why did it take until November last year, when the government had been in place for the 12 previous months, to actually create that focus, create that priority? And I think of the thousands of families, mainly elderly people who have lost money in so many finance collapses, to read that some 15 months after a change of government, the priority of the Serious Fraud Office has shifted to actually making that its first priority and putting the resources in. And if you are to set up a framework such as this, sir, it's very important that the regulators be well resourced, that the resources actually be there to investigate breaches of the law and be there to prosecute and to actually uphold the law. Leanne Dalziel referred earlier this evening to the situation of ING and ANZ. And let me just remind members of the House who weren't fully aware of those circumstances, you had a company called ING, New Zealand Limited, which at the time was 49% owned by the ANZ Bank. So 49% owned, the ANZ Bank owned 49% of ING, and the ANZ actively promoted and sold products on behalf of ING. And the advisors, the client advisors of the ANZ, qualified bank tellers, financial advisors, actively sought out clients of the ANZ and encouraged people to shift their money from safe deposits into the two ING funds which are at fault, the regular income fund and the diversified yield fund. And what was interesting, sir, is I don't believe that for the most part there was malice on behalf of those ANZ staff. I don't believe that those staff actually knew what they were selling. They actually knew what they were selling. And so when I hear the Minister say this evening that this law will require the qualifying financial entity, the QFE, to actually assume responsibility for the advisors and for that advice, that has to be a good thing. It's important that those people actually hold themselves out there with expertise, and when people go to a bank, they expect, people look up to banks, and certainly particularly the elderly. They look up to banks, they respect them. They believe that they can rely on their advice. And, sir, there are many things that were disgraceful about that ING-ANZ situation, not least of which was when it first came to light, the people who invested in that fund were offered a delusory 10 cents in the dollar. Delusory. And I acknowledge the protest group that set up derisory. Thank you. Derisory. I acknowledge the protest group that set up to try and get a better deal for investors. And the tragedy, sir, is that most of the people who invested in that product were offered 62 cents or 64 cents a dollar. And that was an offer that was made to all investors to ING. And as Leanne Dalziel pointed out, to get your 62 cents back, you actually had to sign a piece of paper and to sign away your rights. Which I guess brings me to my next point. Because just as the Serious Fraud Office seems to have taken far, far too long to put the effort into investigating the collapses that have occurred, we also have the Commerce Commission, which has been beavering away for over 12 months. Looking at the situation of ING and ANZ and to see, did they misrepresent the situation? Were they breaching the Fair Trading Act? And I ask again, are sufficient resources being put into that? What is the point of bringing a bill like this to Parliament, passing into law, if the government bodies aren't actually prepared to enforce it and the government isn't prepared to make the resources available? Sir, it's a fact that those people who invested in those two ING products on the advice of the ANZ Bank advisors had the option of applying for additional compensation to the banking ombudsman, but so many of those clients who came through ING advisors didn't. They didn't actually have that benefit of that extra advice. And if the qualifying financial entity is required to take responsibility not just for their employees but for their agents, for the independent financial contractors who hold themselves out with expertise to sell these products, sir, that has to be a good thing. I guess in conclusion, what I'm trying to say to the House is it's all very well to have laws and regulations in place, but it's important that the regulatory bodies be resourced and that they are prepared to enforce the law. And that, sir, I believe is the very minimum that the people of New Zealand can expect from this Parliament and this government. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker.